Welcome to the Moon Baby Magic podcast, a space to honor women's rites of passage stories. From menarche to menopause, the initiations of womanhood all live within our wombs. Through our first bleed to our last, we come to know ourselves more deeply. This is a platform to reclaim the sacredness of all of it. I'm your host, Natalie Elliott, birth keeper and women's coach, specializing in womb wellness and hormonal healing. Ready for slow and sacred storytelling? Let's dive in. Welcome back, women. I am here recording at night again and feeling totally fine doing so, actually, because I'm in sort of the ovulatory window of my cycle, and I've been sharing a lot in Intentional Maidenhood, which has been running for a few weeks now. The distinction between ovulation as just a moment in time on a physiological level and ovulation as our inner summer, as an energetic phase that lasts for kind of a week. So energetically, I'm in that mother inner summer ovulatory energy, and it's like kind of a time where I can work a little bit more and just have more capacity to kind of be going all day. And so I do find myself often in this phase of the cycle feeling really inspired, even kind of at night, to be writing and recording and sharing myself. And that is really what our ovulatory phase can be so beautiful for, is sharing ourselves. I'm so excited. I've been planning the workshops that I'm going to lead at the Nourished and Thriving Women's Retreat just in a few weeks here, May 19th to 26th. At the time of this recording, we still do have 6 spots available. So if you want to come and join the other 6 women who have said yes to the journey, I would love to have you. But yeah, I've been planning my workshops, and one of the workshops that I'm going to lead at the retreat, each day is going to be dedicated to a different cycle phase as far as my workshops. And we're also going to be going to sacred sites and getting massages and having a naked day, and there's so much magic in it. But I'm going to be doing a workshop each day based on different phases of the cycle. And I was really thinking, like, how do I want to do this? Because I do so much teaching online, teaching about the phases of the cycle. And so in an in-person environment, what felt really exciting for me is to offer embodiment experiences that bring the women attending into a deeper lived experience of these archetypes within their cycle. And so for the ovulatory phase, the mother, the inner summer, we're going to be doing this embodied experience of taking up space and claiming our queendom, as well as doing partner womb massage and embodied giving and receiving, to really learn and harness this energy of claiming what it is we want to receive, but also claiming what it is that we want to give. So I'm really excited about that. And yeah, if you're feeling the call to attend, I would love to have you. I'm so excited to be doing more in person. That's a big intention of mine moving forward in this year. And speaking of in person, I'm so excited to have Carly on the podcast today. Carly is a friend of mine who I met in person and isn't a real in-person friend of mine. And it's so interesting. I used to live in Ojai, California, and it holds a really special place in my heart. And that's where Carly and I met. And I was working at a little cafe there on my laptop one day, and I saw Carly running around. There's like this big yard at this cafe, and I saw Carly running around with a baby, carrying a baby, and then chasing her little son all around. And she just looked so natural and beautiful and wonderful doing it. And I just thought, I need to be friends with this woman. And so I went up to talk to her, and we were able to exchange a couple words before she had to chase her son. And I just had caught her name. And then I was so bummed because I was like, I really feel like I'm supposed to be friends with this woman. And gosh, it must have been a few days later, I go to the women's circle at my friend's house, and there Carly walks in. And so our friendship was able to develop. And then we both kind of moved and went our different ways. Carly to Costa Rica, and me kind of all over the place. At the time of the recording, I was actually in Tennessee, and it was winter. and Carly was 13 weeks pregnant. Now I'm in Hawaii. It's warm, tropical spring vibes over here, and Carly is now 30 weeks pregnant. And so a lot has changed and shifted since the time of this conversation, um, but it remains a really sweet, poetic, deep, heartfelt conversation between Carly and I, where Carly really shares what she's learned about the mystery of womanhood and birth and motherhood, and how she's learned to really open and be receptive, and how much of an impact that has had on her life and on birth. And that birth really is this sort of microcosm of the macrocosm of life. So, in this episode, again, I am joined by my incredibly smart and very poetic friend Carly as she shares her journey from experiencing a medically controlled first birth to reclaiming her power in a transformative free birth with her second. Carly discusses how learning to track her cycle after years of different birth control taught her how powerful women are and how she came to truly love her blood. We also delve into the generational healing of women's rites of passage, what those can be like, even just talking about them, and how the healing can be quite simple. Those rites of passage, like birth, and how worthy we are as women of these experiences, of these rites of passage, whether it's our sensuality as young girls or our cycling years in each bleed or birth as being actually pleasurable. This episode is absolutely rich in Carly's sweet, wisdom-filled stories and offers a heartfelt perspective on the beauty and, again, the mystery of womanhood and of birth. So let's dive in and hear what Carly has to say. All right. Hey, Carly, welcome.
Hey, thank you. So happy to be here.
I know, so fun. And it like cracks me up, our different environments. I'm like in this cold winter solstice time with like frost on the ground, and you're over there with your like sun-kissed skin in Costa Rica.
I know we're contrasting. I want to
Truly.
be the Yule frost so bad, but I just I have like these meditations where I envision it and listen to the music and like try to put myself there. But yeah,
Yeah.
we can each take a little bit of what each other has.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I do love living seasonally. That's my one thing is sometimes I think like I love Costa Rica and like part of me
Mhm.
wonders if I could live there. But I don't know. The seasons really ground me. Not necessarily the coldness, but just like the change, you know?
Oh yeah, it's a whole different world. And I think where we're from ancestrally is really significant, like in our blood and lineage. So like we really do well when we're like closest to like the latitude that we're
Mhm.
ancestrally familiar with. And so it can be like very disorienting to be because there are seasons in Costa Rica. There's like two seasons, dry season and wet season, but it's like it feels super foreign to
Mhm.
be in every way, but the seasons do. I miss the seasons a lot.
Yeah, like so many pros and cons of anywhere we could live because I'm sure
Exactly.
it's also wonderful for like your body to be warm and, you know.
Pros and cons. Everything has its light and its dark. Yeah, it's true. Hmm.
Mhm. Well, yeah, speaking of seasons, I like to ask women what phase of their cycle they're in, which can be a seasonal lens, and also what phase of life you're in. So if you want to share that.
Yes, so I am in my mothering phase of life right now, and I'm actually currently 13 weeks pregnant.
Oh
So
my
as
gosh,
of
I didn't know that.
I didn't know. I shared a little bit on my Instagram about being
Okay.
because actually I haven't shared with anyone in my real life, but I have this lovely like small group of just amazing women that I resonate so much with on Instagram that
Yeah.
really understand like these, blood mysteries that we're talking about. I was in the first trimester kind of woes. The first trimester can be a little challenging for me at least. I had to share a little bit about what I was going through on Instagram. I guess you didn't see that,
I
but
didn't see
yes,
it.
I'm just coming out of the first trimester. We didn't plan it, but we were bestowed another blessing of a pregnancy. I'm currently 13 weeks pregnant with our third pregnancy. Yeah, our third child.
Oh my gosh, that's so
Yeah.
exciting. I'm so happy for you, Carly.
Thank you. Thank you. It is
Yeah.
exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a whole different phase of being in something. And I've had actually a few women on here in the first trimester. I guess you're just coming out of it. But
Yeah.
from what I understand, that is a whole initiation and rite of passage in and of itself.
It's such a, the luteal phase, right? Like, I feel like it's like a very extended luteal phase.
Mm.
And like, even if you are pregnant and you don't know you're pregnant yet, you get this feeling of like, okay, something's got to give. Like, where is my blood? Where's my blood?
Yeah.
Everything's being held inside. And then when you find out you are pregnant, there is this feeling of like your body has continued this shoring up of all the blood, and you're
Mm.
in almost like a suspended luteal phase. And I
Mm.
think a lot of reckoning comes with that first trimester. I actually just said something about how I think we need to rename like the 3 trimesters. The first one needs to be the reckoning. The second trimester can be the ripening. And
Yeah.
the third trimester is like the ceremony or the communing, because I really think there's something very inward about the first trimester, a lot like the luteal phase. And it can be very lonely and secretive because you haven't told anyone or you don't want to.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of push pull. I like to think of it as, I was telling my friend, it's almost like you're on the bullet train and all of a sudden the train just stops, or you're going through a wormhole and you're totally disoriented. And that's where the nausea comes from, because you're flowing on your cycle, right? Which is this like amazing monthly flow. And then it's stopped and you're pregnant, and it can feel like coming into a whole new body again. So the first trimester is, for some women, I think it's like nothing. They don't even feel it. But for me, I definitely feel this sense of alert, and that's where the nausea comes from, and the disorientation or the mixed feelings, and it's the reckoning. That's what I
Right.
swear, that's what I'm calling it from now on.
That's so good. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that, the reckoning, the ripening, and the ceremony. Well,
Yeah.
it's interesting the way you describe it because it just, I mean, it reminds me of like, in any, I know you say the third trimester is like more ceremony, but in any ceremony, like the initial like entering in, like I'm just thinking about like anytime I've sat with like plant medicine or something, at first you're just like, oh God, what did I do? Why? Like,
Yeah, that must be. I've never done plant medicine, but I think you're probably right. There's probably a very familiar correlation with those
yeah.
feelings.
Or anytime you like come into something new, right? And it's like you're trying to figure out like, wait, what is this? How do I be in this? And it's just like a little bit awkward and uncomfortable until like you're a little more settled in it. So I can imagine that's how you're feeling entering into the second trimester. And also because you've done this twice, I can imagine there's some understanding around it, which is why you're able to have these terms.
Yeah, maybe each time you do it, you get a little bit more like, oh, I recognize this. Yeah, I know this. Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting. Well, I'm kind of glad I didn't know you were pregnant because that was a fun little surprise.
Yeah, I'm glad I could surprise you.
Well, I do like to travel back with women and bring them back to their first blood mystery of their first bleed or menarche. So I'm curious, some women remember it and some women don't. And I'm curious what you remember, if you do remember anything from that time.
Yeah, I remember like around that time feeling like a very deep loneliness of some girls starting to get their first bleed, and then the other girls wondering like, oh my God, what if I'm not normal? And just where I grew up in the Midwest and like this Protestant culture, everything about it was totally hidden. And I mean, I even feel like going even back farther, which I think has a significant interplay with the first menarche, is like our sensuality as like very young girls. I think a lot
Mhm.
of girls naturally have like an expression of sensuality. And every time I expressed that, it was like very much like frowned upon and like put away. And I think that happens with so many young girls in culture. So leading up to that first bleed, I had, I would be in the bathroom with my mom when she would be having her bleed, and she would kind of just say like, oh, it's a pain. It's what happens when you're a woman. And she would basically say like, it's such a pain. So everything having to do with my sensuality as a girl was
Yeah.
shame, pain, and hiding. So it's funny, I don't remember where I got my period, but I remember thinking that for the first time, I don't know if I'm going to get it. I don't know if I'm normal because like everything was hidden and shamed. So
Whoa.
I didn't have familiarity with how it's supposed to go. Like no one talked about it in my family or anything. And then I remember getting my menarche and kind of then you get it and you're glad you got it, but it's scary. So like fear was my first reaction because it was so alienated in my life. So, I ran to my mom and told her and was like, what do I do? And then you kind of go in the bathroom and it's very hushed. It, I mean, I think so many of us know this vibe. It's
Totally.
it needs to go, but it's just this hushed, shamed, kind of secretive, and
Yeah.
very rushed. I remember it being very rushed. She was like, this is a tampon and this is a pad. And I don't even think she showed me how to use the tampon. I remember the tampon being like the scariest thing.
Same.
I think it was for a lot of my friends too. We
Yeah.
would talk about it. I mean, looking back, it's like I never would use the tampon again. But in my time, it was pads, tampons. But I think my mom just showed me them under the sink and didn't explain any of it and just sort of left me in the bathroom. And it was like, let's sweep it under the rug. And we never really talked about it again. And so I don't have strong memories of my first menarche because it was kind of like shrouded and repressed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so many of us have this experience and some don't. I definitely have some stories in the podcast of women who had a really sweet time, and I'm like, yes, we
Yeah.
need to hold on to those. But man, it's like for us, I also grew up in the Midwest, it's so similar for me, especially when you said the hush hush. I distinctly remember I was at school or at volleyball practice and I got picked up and I like went into the car and my mom and my brother and sister were all in the car and I remember telling my mom and she's like, okay, well, we'll go home and in whisper, she's like, and don't tell your
Yeah.
dad, don't tell your brother.
Yeah, like what is up with not wanting anyone to know? It's like
Yeah.
that's so embarrassing. It really lays that foundation for this embarrassment and shame.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
also in your story, like being left alone with like, left to your own devices with like the tampons and the pads, like how
Yeah.
scary for a young girl. Like what I think of, when I think about rites of passage, it's like one of the really important aspects of a rite of passage when you look at traditional cultures is being held in that passage and having like, the older women or the elders, depending on, who's going through the rite of passage, be there to like not tell you what to do because also rite of passage is an opportunity for you to meet your own power, but to reflect your power back to you. Like that's a really key aspect of a rite of passage. And so for it to be like this hush hush, don't tell anyone, here you go, figure it out, that leaves quite an imprint, I'm sure.
Yes. Yes. And I mean, I even feel that same energy. Even now in 2024, I feel that same energy having to do with birth as well, where it's sort of like the majority of us go into hospital, where I think even epidurals in this way are this continuation of like, keep
Mm,
it like we're going to numb you now so that nobody has to feel what you're going through. Nobody has to experience this. And even just talking about the birth process for so many women who do go into that conventional like hospital birth, I feel like we just brush it under the rug. Like some women like to talk about it, but most of the time it's like, yeah, it's birth, and maybe they'll crack a joke about it, but we're not going there. It's like the same energy of your mom putting you in the bathroom and saying, okay, go, here's the pads, like figure it out. Yeah.
Gosh, that's such an interesting comparison. And it's like, of course, our rites of passage build on each other, but I've never thought about it that way. But it's like, before I got into the birth world and started like really seeking out information and knowledge and stories on birth for myself, I'm like, yeah, all of a sudden people in your life just have a baby and no one talks about how that happened when that's like a
Yeah.
crazy big experience. That's
Yeah.
wild.
It's just they're here now, and we're showing that to our children too, where it's like your sister's here now. They just came home from the hospital. Like it's a stork. The stork brought the baby. Kind of like
That's
any of
totally
those
that
type
vibe.
of threads are just linked to that same
Mm.
shame thread.
Yeah, well, it's like a lot of suppression, right? Of like what, because when you think about women's rites of passage, it is quite different than men's rites of passage. So, like men's rites of passage are like outside of themselves and they're also focused on control. A lot of men's rites of passage, they'll go out into the wilderness and they're supposed to stay calm and be there. Whereas women, our rites of passage happen internally, first of all. So they're happening whether we're marking them or not. Also, our rites of passage are kind of like the feminine energy. And I think that it's really important to have space for that. And so, yeah, like when you were sharing the story of not just your menarche, but before that, of having sort of a suppression of your sensuality. And then the story of your menarche of that being hush hush. And then this idea of birth and that being like, the epidurals like quiet down. It just
Mhm.
reminds me like how important and how beautiful it would be if these rites of passage could if there could be, elder women to hold space for the wildness, the primalness, and like how whole and intact those experiences would be. It reminds me too of, I think it was my friend Jennifer who was on the podcast a couple months ago. She talked about how there was a Native American tradition, and I can't remember which tribe it was, but it was one of the tribes where when a girl got her first bleed, the whole village would like surround her while she just expressed any emotions that she needed to express.
Mm.
So like the anger, the
Wow.
sadness, the fear, and it's like, yeah, that's actually what we really need.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, that'll be our work for the women coming below us, like coming
Yeah.
younger than us. That's our work now because the story's being rewritten again. And now we can also heal our own experiences by providing that rite of passage for the young girls now and like quantumly heal it. But yeah, that's so beautiful. Even just imagining that scenario of all the women in the village surrounding you and your men, just thinking of that as healing because
Yeah.
yeah, we had nothing close to that, but we can do a bit of healing just by envisioning that and kind of trying to rewrite what happened, I think. Yeah.
I agree. I think this work is so important. Even if you don't have kids, just as an adult woman, being the embodiment of living cyclically and honoring your body
Yeah.
and seeing who notices that because people notice, like women notice when there's someone living like that. And you're right, that has this quantum effect, I think.
I mean, yeah, you're right. Just the energy you put off doing the cycle work, even like unconsciously or subconsciously, the effect that it has on young girls too that are observing you or even seeing you in public. I mean, I think even just the way you walk down the street in public, it's a combination of all the work that you've done to open yourself like in your blood mysteries and in your journey as a woman. So like the way that you literally carry yourself and your aura is going to be, it's speaking for itself when you're just walking down the street, and the effect that that has is very powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me, I had one experience like that this year, actually, when I was working on a farm in Tennessee, and she wasn't that much younger than me, maybe like 3 or 4 years younger than me, this other woman there. And I said something like, "Oh, I'm not working today. I'm on my period, so I'm gonna take it easy." And she was like, "You can do that?" I was like, "Yeah, you can." But like just that, like that is so profound
Wow.
for her to be like, "You can do that?" Yeah.
Wow. Well, and it
Yeah.
probably expanded like quantumly her whole worldview as well. Yeah.
Exactly, because just that
Yeah.
sentence is like for you and I, like that would be a pretty simple thing to say,
Yeah.
and
It's like,
for
oh
her,
yeah. Duh.
And I'm thinking like,
Yeah, yeah,
like being in Ojai with all the women, like everyone would be like,
yeah,
oh yeah, for sure.
yeah,
Like it's just the norm. But for
yeah,
someone, who grew up in, I think she grew up in like South Carolina or something, a small town, that sentence in and of itself is like, wait, if I can take time off for my period, but then my period means that I should rest, like it like opens up
yeah,
this whole thing. And I think that's just like the vital importance of embodying your womanhood.
yeah. I think it is very honorable to be truthful about those steps that you've taken as well, because it is our work in a way as women. It's part of women's work to share that learning with each other. Like we were talking about how stories are so significant in the women's world, and just even sharing that brief story that you don't work on the first day of your bleed is like, that's a story that's going to have a huge effect. And I think it's just a good practice to not have to make a big deal out of it or get on a soapbox every time like you're talking to any. It doesn't have to be that way. It can seriously just be like, so I think the more casual it is, the more it impacts like those
Yeah.
people around you.
Yeah, totally. Because then the energy isn't like you're trying to convince someone. You're just like sharing what you're doing, which is kind of like
Yeah,
interesting.
just drop it there and
Oh, I love that.
exactly.
It's just such important work. Well, I'm curious to hear, like, after this first bleed, what sort of happens? What are those like teenage years like for you?
Yeah. It's so interesting to just talk about this because I feel like I barely remember any kind of relationship with my cycle. I
Yeah.
wasn't even aware, I don't even think I had heard the word ovulation, but I didn't know the cycles of the women's moon. I never knew what phase of the cycle I was in unless I was bleeding. And I think I must have gone on the birth control pill or some form of hormonal birth control, probably beginning at least 18, maybe a little bit before that. I remember I had a bit of a fear of sex in general. I
Mhm.
think being raised in this Protestant, somewhat religious family, the attitude was like, you don't have sex until you're married, and we're not ever going to talk about anything having to do with that. So my mom was like, I'm only going to tell you that. Don't have sex until you're married. That's all I'm going to tell you. And good luck.
Oh my
So
God.
I remember feeling like I had relationships in high school, but I didn't lose my virginity until I was 19 because I was just afraid. I was afraid of it. It was just the same thing of being hidden, being shrouded, and being shamed. And then I was on birth control. I went on that Depo Provera shot, which like
Ooh,
totally suppresses your whole. I mean that
that's a
I
rough one.
I hear about that now, and I'm like, oh my God, okay. I'm lucky that I didn't experience like adverse side effects from
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think my relationship with my cycle from like 13 to 25 maybe, or 24, almost so like a little over 10 years was, and those are those formative years that should really be like the blossoming and the peak of womanhood in some ways, I feel like.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's so robbed from us, and
Mhm.
that's such a tragedy. But I think those years for me were spent in and out of questionable relationships, which is a whole other thing that a lot of us experience. But then also, when I think about my cycle, I think about I was totally numb to it and sort of thought of my bleed as like this inconvenience. And then was in and out of the various clinics where I would get my birth control, and variously embarrassed by the people working there. Like there's so much patronizing of women going into any kind of gynecological scenario. I remember telling one doctor, I don't want to take the birth control pill anymore because taking a pill every day, I think I was 22. I was like, I'm 22. I don't want to take a pill every day of my life yet. I'll save that for when I'm like an old person. And she got so angry with me and was like, well, you are, so irresponsible. I can't believe you would complain about something like that. I mean, just with when I was on that Depo-Provera shot, I remember one time I went in and they were like, oh, you've lost too much weight. This is too much weight you've lost. You need to like make sure you're eating enough. And then I went in another time and they said, you've gained weight. Like
Oh
you
my
need to get control of yourself. Here's how to eat healthy. And
God.
I think it, I just remember kind of being like somewhat abused by the medical system, but it was sort of this like abuse that I accepted because I was like, these are doctors. I guess they know what they're talking about. And then I think at 24, I went off of birth control because I was starting to become more aware of, I was starting to become punk about it. Like, fuck you, I don't want to take birth control.
Totally.
And I was single at the time. So I was like, I'm done with this. And that was really when my life began, I feel like, when I was able to
Wow.
just, yeah, go off of it. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I want to pause you. It's
Yeah.
so interesting the thread on like you saying like you kind of just took the abuse because they were doctors. And I think we could
Mm-hmm.
tie that to birth too, like there's this whole term that's like you hear it on birth podcasts and such all the time where people call it like medical rape. You're
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
like, well, it's just rape. Just because this person is a medical professional doesn't mean they're allowed to be condescending, abusive to you. Like commenting on your weight in that way, like so patriarchal. Like, oh, you're too skinny. Now you're too fat. Like, are you kidding me?
So silly. Yeah. It's so silly to hear anything like condescending from someone who literally doesn't know you at all. I think that so many of us are alienated from our cycles because we're told, we're shoved in that room to figure it out for ourselves. A lot of our moms were like, let's get you on the pill. So you go to the doctor to talk about your bleed. You
Yeah,
go
then that
to the
becomes
doctor
your
and it becomes how is the female reproductive system a medical thing at all? It's wild to even think that correlation was ever made.
it's just like the co-opting of like
Yeah.
female bodies. Like that's really
Yeah.
what it is it stems from a very patriarchal place. People don't
Mm-hmm.
like to talk about and whatever, but that's absolutely what it is it's like there's this thing that women have and it's wild and it's powerful and like how can we control that? And I
Yeah.
have all these women on the podcast lately. Actually, just the episode that was released most recently was like someone was talking about how doctors say that, oh, well, we're having too many periods as women because we used to have more kids. So that's why you should go on birth control. And I'm like, how does that math happen?
Oh my God.
It's like it's in birth when they're like, oh, your fluid's too low or your baby,
Oh my God.
like all the stupid things that come up
Yeah.
with to take ownership over something and try to fix it. It's almost like a drama triangle thing, like the hero trying to hero women and make them the victim so that you can save them from the harm that you caused. And
Yeah.
it's psychotic.
It's so psychotic. It's actually like when you just told me that, I all these things flashed in my head of like those kind of things that people told me in my birth, and it's like
Mhm.
they have no idea, first of all, about any of this. And when
Yeah.
you call it a blood mystery, it's all a mystery, and
Yeah.
it's all connected to the higher source. So we have no control over it, and we can have no understanding of it, and we can listen to what it's telling us, like the blood mysteries, but we can never control it, and we can never define it. Even like the idea of putting the blood mysteries into like a box and defining it, it's not even possible. And so when doctors try to do that, it is actually, like you said, it's psychotic. It's like unhinged. It's I can't even, I mean, the things that are said, I think I was chatting with someone the other day, but you know how they say every week of your pregnancy, this is how big your baby is. And that person was like, they cannot know that that's how it happens in every pregnancy. There's no way that there's this linear growth pattern in every baby every week. I mean, it's absolutely insane. And
Well,
it's
imagine if we thought like once your child was born, if they were like, oh, at 1 year old, they'll be as tall
right.
as.
It's really dark and it's
Yeah,
laughable. I think for those of us who understand the mystery and the wildness and
yeah,
are in reverence to it,
yeah,
almost just it's so ridiculous now to hear those things and it's
yeah.
laughable. Yeah.
Well, it's like, as women and as humans, just not just women, like we are animals, and like I think sometimes we forget that because of how like civilized we are. But there's this,
Mhm.
it's almost like I feel like the medical system coming into women's rites of passage is sort of this like, and birth control taking the place of our actual cycle, which, could vary a lot if we weren't on birth control. Like some women could have a 40-day cycle if she has an illness or a stressful event, and someone else might have a 20-day cycle if she ovulates early that month, different things like that. And then how the moon comes in and affects all of this too, like all the different layers that affect our cycles. And that's like the natural, wild, primal, like design of us. But then there's this like medical system that comes in and wants to replace that with this like robotic thing. And I think it's just like sort of a representation of how like the direction modern society is going in general. But it's quite tragic with women's bodies because our bodies are like the miracles of freaking life. Like the creation of life happens in this body. And so it's like you can't like roboticize that.
No, you can't do anything like that for women's experiences. I think like what I see is that the wildness and the mystery and the life force connection that women have to multiply and create life, that needs to be revered and held as the utmost of sacred powers. And
Mm.
then the masculine's function within that, because it's all symbiotic and
Yeah.
we all work together, is the masculine is there to like support that and to help channel that the feminine tries to adhere to like the masculine. If anything, the masculine is attracted to that feminine power that's revered and held as sacred and is supporting it in an honorable way. And
Yeah.
that's for me the only function that I can see that the masculine side of things having in the women's experience. Yeah.
And it just like reminds me too about I've been doing so much work around like understanding men this year because I've been so focused on women for most of my life, which I'm grateful. But I think that it also comes to this fundamental like the two sexes don't understand each other well enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's a whole other topic. But for men, and not that like we say the patriarchy, but the patriarchy isn't just men. The patriarchy is in a whole thing that women can be involved in just as
Yeah.
much. But it
Mm-hmm.
just reminds me it's like a lack of understanding about like what feminine energy is, about how women, how women be. If there was
Yeah.
more understanding around that. Like I talk to men all the time because I'm very open about my cycle or like if I'm bleeding or where my energy is at. I talk to men about this all the time. And so many of them are like so curious about this. And maybe that's because I tend to be around really like high quality men, but it's like
That's
I
good.
think that they just want to know.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's probably new for a lot of men to hear about that kind of thing. And if you are around men who were like, their mothers were open with them and didn't have shame of themselves, then that is probably a very high quality man who is like totally open and not uncomfortable. And hopefully we're going in that direction more. I have hope that we are. And I agree, like learning about each other, like women and men learning about each other is what this life is all about, in my view. At least what my life is about like learning my partner and learning about like the greater world of men and then raising a boy,
Yeah.
a girl, and honoring it. Like I honor men and I honor everything that they're about like so much. And
Yeah.
there's shadow sides of both the feminine and masculine, and we contain both the feminine and masculine. But each one of us does. But I think it is good to be open with men about this kind of thing too. And actually, in my experience, like having a free birth with my husband totally like cracked his whole world open, and it totally broke something inside of him that was sealed, and this hard sealed part of him that didn't know what was possible. And it probably healed him in some ways. I don't know. But men are very affected by women. That's an understatement. That's an understatement.
It's an understatement.
Yeah. But men are so affected by women. And if we are taking care of ourselves and we are able to contain ourselves in our own orbit of this wild, life-giving nature that we have, men are going to be very inspired by that.
Yes. Yeah. I think that the more we embody, like, of course we have feminine and masculine within us, but I think, the more we embody being a woman, I'll just say it in that way, the more men are drawn to that and the more they want to support that too. I think that's what this life is about too, is for us to just understand each other better and learn to be in relationship because, gosh, like how beautiful to have these two different sexes who can bring such different gifts to the table. And I can imagine seeing your wife like freely give birth to a baby, like the epitome of womanhood would just change your life. And that's the design. Men need to be seeing that. Like they're supposed to see that.
Yeah. And it's so empowering for them too. I think like there's so many ways of giving birth, and I don't think any of them is like, it's everything that the woman wants is what's right about giving birth. But the way that it happens with like an undisturbed birth where there's no one but the family there is like usually at the end of the birth, I like yelled for him to come to my side and look and see what was happening and tell me what was happening and tell me it was okay. And he caught like our baby and gave her to me. And think about like he was a hero in that moment. And I wonder if he'd ever had like that heroic of a moment before.
Yeah.
And I don't know, some births, the woman does it all by herself, and that's amazing too. And then the typical birth is like the man is literally like cucked from like cuckolded and has to watch strange like women and men in uniform abuse their wife and baby. And they have, I mean, there's some symbolic patronizing aspects that they can be included on, like, oh, you can hold your baby now, or you can cut the cord, or you
want to hold a knee back?
Right. Do something abusive with us to your wife. But it's like, it's very much like, I think my first birth was like a transfer to a hospital. And I have to really ask my husband more about it, but I think he was almost numb to the whole experience at best. Like it was sort of just like, I don't know what to do here. And then the second experience of that free birth was a completely different experience for him and for both of us, obviously.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious to get into what you want to share about your pregnancy and births, but there's a little gap. So you get off birth control when you were 24. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Yeah.
What was that time of life like?
Yeah. Well, I was at that point in my life, I remember thinking, I'm done with relationships. Like I'm going to think about myself. I'm just going to be like embodied and confident in myself. So I'm off the birth control, and that felt amazing. I remember the feeling changing.
Wow.
And then I met, of course, because when you get that attitude of like, I don't want to meet anyone, you meet someone.
Yeah. Always.
And maybe because I was like on a regular cycle again, I was like attracting more because I mean, the only men I had been I've never made this correlation before, but the only men I had been attracting from when I started dating until like 24 were just like terrible. So maybe it had to do with the birth control.
Oh no, totally.
The hormone. Yeah.
Have you heard the studies on that?
And I've heard that, and I never thought about it for myself before, but it's got to come into play where you're blocking your natural flow of hormones and like those magical flows within you. So you're not tapped into what's right and wrong as much,
Totally.
which is so sinister as well. Just to think about that. I mean, because what's the most important thing for women is that discernment and that instinct of what to let into their womb, which is essentially their heart, and their body multiplies whatever they let into their space. So when you cut off that instinctual, like that intuition, you're really harming the whole world actually, because all the energy is being multiplied. But I think so. I met Parker and my husband, my current husband, and we started dating. And I remember I went on the copper IUD. That's how I did birth control from like 25 to 29. I thought, I was like, no more hormones. Hormones are terrible. The copper ID is good. So I would say this is when I entered my like middle ground phase, which lasted until the birth of my first son. So the middle ground phase was like, I'm starting to catch on. Like hormones are bad and eating healthy is good. And we're into grounding and low EMFs and stuff like that. But I wasn't quite aware energetically of how sinister still some of these things were. So even the IUD, I mean, I'm sure you have stories of this, or I don't know if you have experience with it, but it's extremely painful to have the IUD put in. And they like downplay it a lot. They're just like, it's gonna hurt a little, but it's not a big deal. It's the best thing ever. And it's extremely painful. I almost vomited and passed out when I had mine put in.
Well, it's like just what you were saying about not having the discernment to put what to put in your body, who to allow in
Yes.
your body. It's like, of course, like when I used to try to put a tampon in when I was a young girl, I was never great with tampons. I would get lightheaded and nearly faint. And for me
Oh
now,
my God.
like
Yes.
my body did not want that. And so it's like it's the same with this copper IUD.
That is so true. Like when your body is having that reaction, like the pain reaction and the passing out or the vomiting reaction, that's a very healthy and proper response
Yeah.
to that craziness. Like, again, that psychotic thing that we're doing, which it really is like, it's really psychotic to do these kind of things to our body. And I remember, so that the journey with the IUD was sort of just this thing about like, well, it's not hormonal, it's like a healthier choice. And I didn't really understand that doing like the cycle syncing and family planning method was going to work for me for some reason. And of course, I wish I would have started that earlier. But then going into like the age of 29 or 30, I remember being like, I got more wise to the fact that maybe having like a copper item in my cervix wasn't the best thing. And I remember hearing stories about women being like, I was totally insane. And then I got my copper IUD removed and I was all better. So I went and got it removed. And that's when I started. So I was 30 years old when I started becoming aware of the cycles of my like bleed, which is so crazy. I mean, back in the day, a lot of women were like halfway through having all of their kids by that age. And I was just being like, oh my God, this is what it feels like to ovulate. That's amazing. And I remember having a book by Elisa VT, which was like, she does flow living. And that cracked my whole world open into cycle syncing. I remember feeling those first phases and tracking them in like a calendar and feeling so powerful about it. I started to become aware how incredible my body was and how incredible like women are. At
Yeah.
50 years old, for the first time, I had been totally numb to it until that age, which is just insane.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like I almost want to say it's like a side effect of tracking your cycle is realizing how freaking powerful and amazing you and every other woman is.
Hmm.
Like how
Yeah.
yeah, like how have we been so separate from that, you know?
I mean, I don't even know how. It's hard to even imagine how can we ignore this? How could we suppress this? I used to be this person, so I totally understand. But when I hear women complaining about their cycle, it's hard for me to even hear it now because I just think how amazing it is that we have it. Of course, we have to reckon with the idea that we're fertile from like 13 to maybe like 50 or 60. And that's a big responsibility because that's a long period of time where every month we have the possibility of becoming pregnant and carrying a life into the world, which is definitely like a big deal. It's a blood oath, basically, to whoever you're having the baby with. It's a blood oath to that person. And it's like you're carrying forth life. And that can be in that way. I see how like the blood mysteries can weigh on us women at some points in our life. But other than that, I mean, other than this fertility aspect that we have to reckon, which is actually, I mean, being fertile is like the bomb. I mean, what's
Oh
better
yeah.
than being fertile? Like, how good does that feel? I mean,
Yeah.
ovulation is like the best feeling ever.
Yeah.
But I understand how it can be hard to reckon with that possibility every month of falling pregnant. When I hear women complain about like even I still complain about being luteal sometimes because being
Yeah.
luteal is like incredibly challenging.
It is.
I get it. But now that I have this relationship with bleeding, I'm like, I love bleeding because to me,
So
the bleed is like, we've always thought that was like the worst part, but the bleeding is this catharsis and release and it's purification. Everything that we felt in the luteal phase, all the pain, we're meant to feel it in that phase because we're meant to like the blood is building. We're meant to put that into our blood and the physical occurrence of the blood leaving us is that pain leaving us as well. So every month we're like cleansing and clearing and we're not just cleansing and clearing for ourselves. Because we're women and we're like tuned in and we're like energetic regulators for the whole family and for our friends and we're taking the pain of all of these people around us and even collective pain sometimes and purifying and letting it out, you know, and that's why putting it into the earth and offering it to the earth is such a beautiful practice. It's amazing. Like I think when I hear women complaining about bleeding now, I'm just like, oh God, go enjoy it. It's the
yeah.
best part. Like I know it can be painful even for me still sometimes, but
Yeah.
even the pain feels good to me now.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I so resonate with all of that. Yeah, because sometimes when I have a lot of pain, I had a really painful cycle around Samhain, you know, like Halloween, that time of year. And that's always a super intense time of year for me because I live really intentionally with the seasons and these like 6 week markers in between the seasons. And so I do intentionally do a lot of like shadow work and releasing work around that time. And I had this like crazy painful period. And I was like, at first, I'm like, what is going on? Like, did I, you know, I'm like, do I have some estrogen dominance? You know, my like brain starts going like that.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden, I remember on the second day, I was like, oh, my body's releasing all this stuff on a physical level that I released on like a mental level. And then it
Mhm.
was just like such deep gratitude for my body that like I can do that. And, you know, I just think we're so lucky as women. Like, we're so blessed that, like, every month we have this clearing, and every
Mhm.
month we get to be, like, born anew and renewed.
Mhm. That's so cool that you're able to correlate that because I think when you said that, that made me realize too that I think we have a choice of like riding with our cycle. Like if our cycle was like a dragon, we're like the dragon rider, and we can choose what territory to go through and what
Mm.
wisdom to gather or what pain to release. And if we are contending with something a little more dark, that will show up in the cycle, and that it's not necessarily a bad thing, that the symptom of it is actually sign of more healing, you know? Yeah.
I love that you were able to come to this cycle awareness place before you got pregnant, because I think that that is a really beautiful thing to gift yourself, is that connection with your body before you go into your next blood mystery. You did kind of reclaim that first blood mystery before the next one, which is beautiful.
I remember, I think I must have been doing like the natural cycle syncing FAM method for maybe a year, almost a year before I got pregnant with my first son. And I remember just feeling, I just loved it. Like I was so into it. I remember I was working a 9 to 5 job at the time, and I would be like, okay, like this week I'm gonna be eating really nutrient dense and taking it easy. And I was so into it and had that feeling of more empowerment as a woman.
Yeah.
And then I remember something always happens when I conceive. I travel somewhere, I go on a trip, and I don't know, I'm like a Sagittarius stellium, so maybe it has
Okay.
to do with that. But like I go on it's happened 3 times. Like I go on a trip and I have a focus on a certain like nutrient dense diet, and then I like travel back home and I get pregnant. And I always have some sort of message happening to me too when I'm on the trip. It's crazy that it's happened 3 times, but the first time I had gone to Florida to have a trip with my sisters-in-law and mother-in-law, and I remember I was really into eating oysters, and it must be like instinctively, I know I'm going to be pregnant and I'm trying to build up the nutrient stores. I ate like a ton of oysters and seafood, and I went snorkeling. I was starting my ovulation phase, and I went snorkeling, and I was like floating in the middle of like a school of fish, just like these beautiful tiny fish all around me. And I remember thinking, like, I am a mother already. I'm already a mother. Like, I'm like a mother to these fish right now. And that being a mother isn't just like having a baby, like, you embody the mother already, no matter what phase of your life you're in. And I remember just having that revelation. And, you know, I never felt much of a maternal instinct before that. In fact,
Mm.
Parker and I would occasionally discuss, like, maybe we don't want to have kids. But that was my first moment where I had like a maternal feeling, and it was like a voice coming into my head. It wasn't like any kind of thought.
Wow.
And then I remember at the end of that trip I was like so ovulating, like just that peak ovulation feeling. And I thought I ovulated during my travels, like I'm done ovulating now, and went back, and I think a day later my son was conceived. And I thought at the time that the timing was okay, but I cut it too close. And it turned out that I was pregnant, and I took a test in the bathroom at my job, and the whole world changed. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that the mother is like an energy you choose to embody. One of my teachers in some of the schooling I've done for the blood mysteries, Nancy Lucina, she talks about that. She's like, a lot of women move into the mother energy naturally around their Saturn return, which is like your late 20s, you know?
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
it sounds like that happened for you, which is so sweet and beautiful.
It's nothing you go to achieve, like how you talked about how men go outside of themselves. It's something that you receive and comes into you and comes into your head or your heart and soul. And it just is. And in that moment, I remember having this piece of like, even if you don't have children, you're still a mother. So hold that. You're now a mother. Like, hold that energy with you because it's very powerful and it's a
Oh,
love energy. I just remember that feeling of like, these fish are surrounding you because they love you. And like, I don't know, it was, yeah,
magnetic. Think about, within the cycle, the mother archetype is associated with our ovulatory window, and that's like this phase of the cycle where we're magnetic.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. What do you want to share about that pregnancy?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to share just that. I think this might resonate with some women because, like I said before, this was kind of my middle ground, middle road phase of my life. Or maybe I shouldn't call it that because I think often, like, the middle ground is the best place to be. But I had one foot in one world and I was sitting on a fence. Like, I was really into holistic practices, starting to get into ideas about manifestation and the divine feminine and more yogic principles like that and Ayurveda and stuff. But I still had such an ingrained indoctrination with the medical system. And it's so entrenched, really, from a young age. You're just being taken to the doctor all the time, and it's so normalized. I didn't make a connection. I just wasn't deep enough to understand. I think I needed to have some real dark experiences.
Mm.
Maybe it was in my life path to experience. And that's quite an earthly way of learning, to really get in there and experience the bad thing and then transmute and transcend it. I remember being like, I'm going to do a home birth and I'm going to have a midwife because midwives are great. I was, and I'm not saying all midwives are bad, but
Yeah.
I thought all midwives were angels
Oh.
who just wanted women to have amazing births. And I just sort of ate up the story that I now see as like a propaganda story of midwives being really saintly and honorable
Mm.
and being feminist and not, they didn't like doctors, that they're trying to like make sure nothing bad happens to your baby, but they're gonna honor everything about you.
Mm.
And in my experience, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
And in many women's experiences that I've learned since then, that's not how it works for maybe like 99% of women who use midwives. So I I was like very holistic, crunchy. I was like, we're gonna have a midwife because just in case, right?
Well, it's like being in the
Yeah.
medical system, but being in the medical system in more of like I don't know. It's almost like Emily Saldea from the Freebird Society calls that like wolves in sheep's clothing, which is
Mhm.
like sort of an intense term.
That's what, yeah,
Yeah.
that I've heard her say that, and that totally resonates with me. And when I heard her say that, that was very healing for me because
Mm.
I didn't realize the level of trauma I experienced until after. And when I was able to sort of see these women as wolf in sheep's clothing, I was able to forgive myself a little bit because it really, I think midwives, even more than doctors in a lot of ways, can be even more sinister
Yeah.
because of that wolf in sheep's
Like,
clothing. It's quite frightening. And if you think about the fact that modern midwives were actually like a development off of male obstetrics,
yeah.
just that fact in itself shows you that they're more sinister because it's like an evolution or a development from something that is pure
Mm.
evil to start with.
Mm. Ugh.
So, in my experience, like midwives that I worked with were very, very frightened women, which is not a place you want to be. You don't want to be with someone who's frightened at
Yeah.
your birth. So
Well,
I
it's the
went,
same thing as like your menarche, and your menarche, your mom was just kind of like,
yeah.
here you go. And like, there's that fear. And we talked about needing that holding. Like, you need someone who can not be afraid and not think something is wrong or like You need someone who can reflect back to you like, you've got this, you're powerful, like this is okay.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, you're right. That the fear element plays into the whole um the whole women's experience as well. Yeah, and that's a huge part of it. I had midwives my whole pregnancy, and then it was like the situation where you see it's a group of midwives, and there were four, and whoever was on call that day would end up at my birth. I think I met each of them once, and a couple of them I had two appointments with. That in itself is crazy. I mean, I think one of the wildest things about women's experience is how we can choose for the most intimate experience of our life to be with someone we barely know.
Yeah.
I think that is one of the most insane things now that I think about our choices in the current, like the mainstream choices in the current world. But when it came time, I think around 40 weeks, I was starting to have some like warm up sensations. And this is sort of like when you have cramps as a young girl and your mom just says like, take some Tylenol. I know it's terrible. And the midwife was like, oh, it's so annoying. I know. Just if you want, we can. I was in Canada at the time, and apparently they give patients morphine for like pain relief for warm up contractions, which is like the craziest thing. She was like, if you want, just I'll write you a prescription for some morphine, and that'll get you through. And at that time, I mean, I was at the dawn of like understanding that these women were not it and that I should have a free birth, but I didn't quite get there because I think I had to walk through the fire to understand the consequences of my choices. But I was just like, no thanks. And then I was at about almost 41 weeks. And of course, that's another thing that, like, how we talked about how nothing is linear in the women's experience. So I'm actually like a firm believer now that 42 weeks in the scientific terms is actually 40 weeks gestation. So I believe that women who have their babies like around 42 weeks is like the normal range. But at the time, it's like, oh, they sort of start getting nervous and they start putting fearful ideas in my head. They said because my son's head wasn't engaged in my pelvis, which doesn't always happen in the first pregnancy, it happens during birth. But she got super freaked out about that and was saying stuff about how cord prolapse, which is one of the most serious things that can happen in birth, could happen to me because my baby wasn't engaged.
Oh my God. That's literally just fear projection.
It is, I mean, the things these women flippantly said to me with no thought other than like what they were going to have for lunch that day was actually psychotic. I mean, I really think that descriptor of a word is appropriate that you used because the effect it has on a woman who's like in her sacred like ceremonial window, I mean, it's just how they can do that, I don't know. But and actually at the time as well, the pandemic lockdowns had just started because I had him in April 2020. So the same midwife who was all scared about my son not being engaged, which by the way, there's no correlation between that and cord prolapse. There's nothing abnormal about a head not being engaged in the pelvis in a first pregnancy. It's not abnormal. And cord prolapse is like extremely rare.
Yeah.
So, but she was very fearful about COVID as well. And I remember her telling me like, I don't know if you're going to be able to have a home birth because we just don't know what's going on right now. And so that like sent me into a tizzy as well and caused me so much stress. And then she was like, if you want to help, you can sew those cotton masks. Like, remember when, you might not remember this, but when the pandemic lockdown started, because I was immersed in this midwife culture, the midwives were panicking that they weren't going to have enough, I don't know what they call it, PPE or something, like protective
Oh,
wear. So they're like, they started like making these sewing patterns for masks to like give to people to volunteer to sew these cotton masks for midwives. I mean, it was such a victim. Talk
what?
about the drama triangle. It was such a victim like theater. Oh, anyway.
That's
So
why I don't think I remember that, which is funny because I was attending births as a doula back then, but I don't remember that.
it might have been more in Canada. I don't,
Maybe.
because I was in Canada. But
Yeah.
they, so at around 40 weeks pregnant, this woman's telling me like, you might not have a home birth, but who knows? And if you could like sew up some cotton masks, like that would be great.
Oh my
And
God.
just, I mean, I remember actually listening to maybe one or two Free Birth Society podcasts like after that appointment and thinking like, can I do this? Can I do this? But I just didn't cross the threshold. And like I said, it was really like part of my journey to experience what I did, because
Yeah.
hopefully it can help other women as well if I tell my story. But
Yeah.
I was laying in bed at night and my water broke, and it immediately started, I think I might not have done the free birth because what the midwife said about like the pelvis, his head being not engaged and a cord prolapse like scared me so badly, which is so horrible. But I remember when my water broke, I was like, oh my God, I have to feel to make sure that like a cord's not coming out, which is just, it's absolutely insane.
Yeah.
There's no indication that that was going to happen to me. She was totally like off her rocker and irresponsible in telling me that. And it started my labor off with like quite a panic. So I was sort of freaking out. And then I thought, I need to like call the midwife because I think my labor is starting and I'm all worried about this like cord prolapse thing that she put into my head. So we texted the midwife and I had a doula as well.
Mhm.
And they actually came over pretty quickly. And there was some meconium in the waters. So I've come to find out now that that's like totally normal, especially for babies over 40 weeks. And when I had my daughter, I free birthed my daughter, there was like the same amount of meconium in my waters. And now I just look at it like that's the way I do it. Like
Yeah.
I go over 40 weeks and there's meconium in my water. It feels so normal to me and it feels so comforting to me, even that I know
Mm.
that I have those patterns. And it's,
The thing about like having a sovereign birth and like it gives you the opportunity to know your norms. Like, because every
yes,
woman births a little bit differently and has things that are normal for her.
yeah. And it's amazing to know what happens when you leave it all undisturbed and you realize that it all was supposed to happen that way. So I remember all I had heard about meconium and waters before was that it's like not good, and then the baby's in distress. That's what they always say. So I had like a choice point where I could transfer to hospital or stay at home. And the midwife who had ended up coming to my birth was the super scared midwife who told me about cord prolapse and told me to sew cotton masks, which is,
Girl.
of course, that was the midwife. Like, this was meant to be my journey. And she was, of course, like, I want to keep tabs on the heart rate. And if you're at home, I can't do that. And if you're at the hospital, I can. And so then the heart rate is a whole other thing that we know about now that's very arbitrary and random. And the heart rate of a child, a baby, when you're giving birth fluctuates a lot naturally. Yeah. And I didn't know that at the time. So, of course, I want my baby to be okay. So we go to the hospital. And it's funny, actually, looking back on my labor, my favorite part of the birth experience, a lot of women say the worst part is going in the car. I was so happy in the car because no one was there. And I was like in the back seat. The windows were open and the cool air was like blowing in on me. And I was able to like feel these sensations without anyone around. After that birth, I realized that was part of what made me realize like this, it's meant to be that I do birth alone and undisturbed. But then we get to the hospital and it's just all kind of terrible because hospitals are just so not the place to be. You get into all the artificial lighting, and then the security guard is saying, you can't have your doula because it's COVID. And the doula is fighting with the security guard, and I'm on the floor. I'm on like a dirty floor having like a wave. And it's like the waves are intense. Like I think I was getting into active labor and crying.
Like a nightmare.
It's a nightmare. Then we finally get signed in. And this reminds me of what you said something before about like a medical person or someone commenting on like how much fluid there was or something. But this midwife was giving me so I had to get a vaginal exam to be admitted to the hospital. And she was just like, you have so many waters, like your waters just keep coming and coming out, like there's so much of it. And she was like so surprised. And just the fact that she said that I remember looking back on that as well and being like, gosh, you guys have like no idea what you're dealing with, do you? Like the fact that my body kept creating these like abundant waters was like mind blowing to her. And that there's like an eternal spring within our bodies, that our bodies as women can do anything and will do anything. And you'll never understand. It'll never be like a cup of this or like a tablespoon of this. No. It's going to, no matter what setting you're in, birth is going to rock you, as like the attending midwife as well. And knowing like she's just not in control here. Like ultimately the birth of the baby with the mother is what's in control, even when you're in this hospital. And they try to control it, but they're just trying to tame like a wild animal. And I remember like after the birth thinking it's almost like slapstick comedy, like women giving birth in the hospital, because there's just all these attendants like trying to measure this and like hook this up and do this exact medicine. And
so weird.
When's the baby going to come out? And then the doctor's like, you have 2 minutes, and they're trying to like put parameters and like control on this thing, and they're failing. What you see most of the time in like a hospitalized birth is like people flailing and failing. And I think what I really framed it as afterwards was like being failed by a bunch of people that I shouldn't have put any of my power in. But because of indoctrination and things I did. So I can't blame myself, but I definitely learned and completely learned and will never go back to it. Wow. But to sum up the birth story, we went to the room and there's actually a bathtub in the room, which is nice. The Canadian hospitals sometimes have that. So I was able to go in the tub and the water was such a relief. And I was pretty well left alone. but I was totally rocked by the intensity and the pain because I perceived it as pain. I was very much resisting the whole thing. I think in many ways because I was so scared because I was surrounded by strangers.
Mm.
And it's really hard to open and be vulnerable around strangers. And
Of course.
actually, like, I think opening is something that I've learned, opening and expanding and channeling this power and energy is something that I've learned to do more and more throughout my life as a woman. And
Mm.
birth is like the ultimate expression of opening and expanding and channeling power.
Yeah.
And that's how the sensations of birth can change or become less painful in a way and perceived differently. But
Mm.
at that time I was in so much pain because I was sort of, it was the ultimate expression of like being on the fence because I was like trying to give birth unmedicated, but then I was like terrified to be surrounded by these medical professionals. And I think I was in the tub for like 6 hours maybe. And then I went into transition. And I remember knowing that I was going into transition. So this was another moment where I felt like I was the only one in power, which was funny because there were all these people around, but I was the only one who knew that I was going into transition. And then they finally realized that I was going into transition as well. And they were like, okay, like
Oh
it's
God.
happening. And I think the midwife was starting to get like, I looking back at it, I think she might have been like, I think I want to get home to like take my kids to school because it was around maybe 5 or 6 a.m. at the time.
Yeah.
And you know that happens all
I
the
know I've been a doula and I distinctly remember it was the last hospital birth I attended that I was like, this is the last birth I attend in this system. And it was a hospital transfer. And I remember being in the lobby and I was like trying to get in as a doula in 2020 and COVID, and that was a whole thing. And the
time.
midwife was just sitting in the lobby on her laptop. And I was like, hey, when you go up there, will you blah, 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 whatever. I had something for her to tell my client. And she was like,
Mhm.
oh, I'm not going in. And I was like, what? And she was like, oh, yeah, my son has a track meet. She
Oh my
she just
God.
transferred this woman so that she could go to her son's.
I've heard of that happening too. Like it's like the handoff.
So crazy.
And my midwife did like a handoff to a doctor as well. And I kind of, I mean, kind of like how she had given that cord prolapse thing, she gave some obtuse like comment about how the heart rate was starting to change, which is so funny because the heart rate changes when you
Yeah,
go into transition,
of
and the
course.
heart rate's going to change. It's going to change when your baby is coming through
Yeah.
to the opening, and it's just ridiculous. And so I had to get out of the tub, which is terrible. They never
Mm.
should have done that to me. I mean, I was hooked up to the monitors the whole time, which is just awful. And of course, like that in itself, like being hooked up to monitors the whole time can have an effect on the heart rate as well. So it, like you said before, they're creating the problem and then they're doing something even worse to fix the problem. But I got out of the tub and had to go onto the bed in the middle of like the terrifying room that's super bright. I mean, they couldn't make hospital rooms more terrifying in my view. It's terrifying. And it's the last environment that I would ever want to be in having a baby. Like I prefer the car.
Yeah,
But
obviously.
I was on the bed and then they make you like purple push basically, which you kind of, because she wants you to have the baby soon, like the midwife was like, we need to have the baby now, or the doctor's going to have to come in and help you out with the vacuum. Threaten me. So she put that threat on me like at the beginning of this pushing. And so right away I'm exhausted, I'm terrified, all I want is to get out of there. And I think this happens to a lot of women where they just want to like disassociate and like do whatever you need to do. I need to get out of here. And but up until that point, I hadn't been medicated or given an epidural, which I am grateful for. But she let me try pushing for like an hour or two, I think. And it was terrible because I'm like forcefully trying to push my baby out. And he was crowning, actually. Like they saw his head and had me like feel his head. But she still decided to call this doctor in to use the vacuum to take my son out. And I really wish I had just screamed no. But I was in like a fugue state, I think, at that point. I was just utterly traumatized already. So she did the handoff, like because she was probably, this woman was so full of fear. And this doctor who I'd never met before in my life came in and they like suction a vacuum onto the baby's head and pull your baby out. I mean, it's shocking. It's super painful. I have almost no memory of it because I think I've kind of tried to shut it away, but I just remember it being very like jarring and shocking. And for my son, I can't imagine. And I think we had to do a lot of work after his birth to like him even be okay with touching his head, because that was like his first memory of the outside world was that terrible. And even to this day, part of my journey with him is to try not to force him to do things and force him out of situations and let him make his own decisions, because the first thing that happened to him was like someone forcing him. Yeah. So after that, and the doctor was like, great, your baby's here, peace out. And then I had a tear and had to be stitched up. It was that thing where you want to get out of there so bad and you want everyone to stop talking, all these women you don't know, nurses surrounding you. And finally we were able to go to our own room and kind of chill out. Yeah, so after that experience, I think just like a couple months postpartum, I mean, even the postpartum experience is so different when you're like being attended to by like midwives. I mean, and this is something that doesn't get talked about either, is like it's also kind of hidden away, the fact that you bleed a lot postpartum. And now I know a lot more because I've listened to so many women's birth stories. Yeah. But it's something that was never talked about before. Like, you bleed, you feel like you've been hit by a truck, like you might have a lot of pain down there, and going to the bathroom is going to be hard. The intensity of it is going to be the craziest thing you've ever felt. And so I remember postpartum with my first after the hospital birth being very kind of shocking to me as well. And I think that whole experience radicalized me. Wow. Every time I would it was sort of like putting pieces of the mystery together, like, oh, that shouldn't have happened. And actually, I was the one in charge of that. And I never should have given that to someone. And actually, my birth was so straightforward. And if I would have just stayed home, it would have been amazing and flawless and perfect. I started putting these pieces together of how I'd been lied to and how I had been kind of dishonored, and how these blood mysteries and pregnancy and birth, postpartum mysteries had been hidden from me. And I started to feel like I went through a period of like intense anger and like rage at the grief that I was feeling, for like, how dare they? Like, and I got really deep into like the Free Birth Society and then Yolanda's teachings during like, I think from 6 months postpartum to up until I gave birth to my second daughter, I was like listening to all the podcast stories. I was in the memberships. I was meeting women like you and like Chanley, who was helped me out in my postpartum with my second. And I mean, I met a few women in person that I met through like the memberships. And I really needed that at that time to just hear like the resonance of other women's stories and how they had been so dishonored and how it was okay because like we are going to stop it now and like heal. And I needed that collective healing experience, which I think that's an important part of this whole picture of like the blood mysteries is if there's healing to do, like if you didn't grow up with the perfect rites of passage and experience, then there's healing to do. And there should be a phase of that healing where you're like connecting with other women. And I think we each reach this phase of healing. Maybe we're a maiden still, maybe we're a mother, maybe we're like in the crone phase and or menopause phase and we're still healing. And it doesn't matter what phase you're in, you need to like connect with other women and hear the pain from each other and kind of get it out and release it. So that was an important part of healing and coming to like radical responsibility, basically, you know, which is something that Emily and Yolanda teach. That was really important for me to hear from those women because they're like very strong about it and very straightforward about it. And now I found my own kind of guiding principles where I don't need to hear from other women as much as I did, but I really needed that for like 3 years. So I'm very grateful to their work for just existing and being there. And then to every woman who shared their stories, how many times have you like cried listening to like a Free Birth Society podcast episode?
So true.
All those tears were like alchemized all of this like collective pain. And I think that happens so many times a day, every time a woman listens to those episodes and listens to your episodes. The stories are a really important part of the healing.
Like, I think that's an important aspect is like knowing that this path that we want to walk, like another woman has walked that path before. It makes it seem possible.
Yes. And that's a big part of it too, was hearing like there were a few stories that stuck out with me that made me really know that I could do a free birth. I mean, I knew without listening to stories that I could, but there were a couple of episodes of women who I really like identified with. And when you hear those similarities and then you're like, oh, I can totally do this. Yeah. And I hope when I share my stories sometimes that some women are like, I can do that. If she can do that, I can do that. And that's what Yolanda says all the time. Like in her membership calls, I remember her always being like, listen, like I'm a mess. If I can do this, like you can do it. Anyone can do it. So then I really called in the conception of my second child really consciously. And I didn't do any like real rituals around it, but I did get into like a nutrient dense diet. I into like GAPS and like the Weston A. Price diet, traveled to North Carolina actually. And we tried 1 month to conceive her and it didn't work out. And then we tried the second month and we became pregnant. I became pregnant. And that's another thing I've learned with like the cycle is that you can't control when you become pregnant. It's like you're either going to get totally surprised and get pregnant when you're not trying, which is what happened to me this time, or you're going to try. And I have, you know, there's women who try for years and it doesn't happen, but then it happens, and it's supposed to happen when it's supposed to happen. And the conception is like coming from another realm, you know, and we don't have total control over it. Even if we do like the exact right timing with the cycle and the temperature or whatever, it comes when it comes. And so I became pregnant with my daughter, and I was just like, wild pregnancy, 100%. We're not messing around. Like, I didn't take a pregnancy test. That was super cool because I knew I had this knowing to experience everything about pregnancy without any external knowledge or people involved or medical BS is the greatest feeling. Talk about being empowered. It's like having faith in what your body's doing is so rewarding. And then you start to realize the purpose of every phase of pregnancy. Like, the reason why we don't feel super connected to our baby until 20 weeks is because we're not necessarily supposed to, or that it's supposed to be very mysterious, and maybe the soul isn't coming into the body until then. And when we start to feel those like kicks and the lightning, then we're starting to realize that it's real, and just how much of pregnancy is supposed to be a mystery. Like, not knowing what the gender of your baby is. I mean, that's supposed to be that way. Not knowing everything about your baby, but you know enough. Like, this alive feeling in your womb, you know, the fullness you feel, you have these intuitive hits, and this magic is happening in you. And when you take out all of the logical, like, medical framework, you are just like bathing in this intuitive blessing every day. And she knows I'm talking about her because she's screaming at. She's the most confident kid in the world. It's probably it was a free birth, but she's like, "Mama, I want you." But pregnant, so the things that you realize that pregnancy is supposed to be such a mystery, and but yet, you know, when you feel your baby kick that they're well. And you, at the end of pregnancy, when you start to feel like these sensations, that's getting you ready for birth. So just to kind of go into her birth story, my prenatal care was like going into the woods and sitting on the earth and like taking the sun power and taking the earth power and the air power, and just like saying, give me your blessings, I am yours, and I know that this is all for the highest good of all, and like, thank you, I'm so grateful. And so I guess it was like a mix of prayer and meditation, and then a bit of communing without language to my baby, and just having like the utmost in faith. Really, it's funny because when we think about how our natural cycles treat us and how pregnancy in its natural form treats us, it's so good and it's so benevolent and it's so blessed. And then you think about how you're treated by doctors and by the shame, and it's so yucky and it's so terrible. So why wouldn't you have faith in the thing that is, in actuality, when you remove the indoctrination and the evil stories from it, in reality, it's like bestowing blessings on you, even in the form of discomfort. Discomfort is a blessing because it's a message. And I began to realize that, like, God, whatever form, the Godhead, is a beautiful like love force. And I was at the time, I also did Yolanda's portal program because I thought it would be wonderful to like get into painless birth as well.
Yeah.
And at the end of, let's see, I was probably 39 weeks pregnant when I started having like warm up sensations for leading up for like 2 or 3 weeks until the birth. So it was like 2 or 3 weeks. And where in my previous birth experience, the midwife like was like, oh, take some morphine. It's terrible. This time, every time I would have these sensations, I was like, I love this. I love this. This is amazing. And I started opening to it. And I started being so grateful for the opening and the expansion of it. And I started to recognize these sensations as like the power of like the Godhead flowing through my body. And I was like, how incredible I am to experience this. And
Yeah.
even though I was on my own, I was the only one experiencing it. Like my family would go on doing their own things and I would kind of sit with these sensations. It wasn't a lonely feeling because I felt when I was feeling those sensations, I felt like I was in the presence of God.
Mm.
And I think I opened myself to the possibility that we can commune with a higher power in total bliss. And it was just that, it was bliss. And then I went to 41 weeks, but I wasn't afraid because I knew that everything was happening in its own divine timing. I think I lost my mucus plug the day before I was 41 weeks. And then the next day was Christmas. So it's almost my daughter's second birthday now. It was Christmas, and there's nothing better than a wild pregnancy and not knowing anything and then just feeling I mean, it's like heaven on earth.
What keeps coming up as you're talking about this, and I want to hear about the birth. I'm very excited to hear about the birth.
Yeah.
What I'll say is like you sort of removed yourself from any outside influence, whether that be your prenatal care, how long you should be having sensations, what the sensations mean, if the sensation is pain or pleasure. Like you removed yourself from all of that, and that gave you space to have your own experience of it, which is the really beautiful thing about this like rite of passage is like you got to claim your power in it. And that's in the way that you felt God in the sensations. And that's in the way that you chose your prenatal care. That's got to be magical.
Wow, yeah, that is such a good way to describe it. It's like a total reclamation. And I've talked about this in my work, but it is like taking total ownership of your rights as a woman, your rights as in like rites of passage,
Yeah.
and being so deserving of that. Because part of this like enjoyment of these sensations and this mystery and the intensity is feeling truly deserving of
Mm,
goodness and
mm,
understanding that birth can be like a goodness being bestowed upon you, even if it's challenging, and that you deserve to give birth naturally and for it to unfold perfectly like it has been designed to. Just like you deserve to enjoy your cycle
yeah.
and your sensuality as a girl and a woman. You are meant to like relish and bathe and dance and unfold and open into that. And it's pleasure. And
Yeah.
we cut off our off our opening and our pleasure and like sequester it away into like a forbidden room. And when we choose to open that door and let that back into our lives and reclaim it as truly our own, then I mean, then your power as a woman it's reached its ultimate pinnacle. And then you can do like anything and you are not stopped by anything. You can do that without giving birth, and
Yeah.
you can be in any phase of your life as a woman. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Take me to the birth.
Yeah, so then it was Christmas, and then the next day I think I just had like a knowing that it was going to happen soon because those sensations were more regular. And I just remember telling Parker, like, it's going to happen today. It's going to happen soon. And I was just like so excited. Like, I was kind of giddy and but very calm. And at a certain point, I asked, it was morning time, I was out with my son playing, and then maybe at 1 p.m. or so I kind of wanted to sit with the sensations, and I put on some music and was like kind of flowing with the sensations and just like having gratitude every time. I remember really feeling like my body for the first time, which is funny too, to think that like for 30 some years, I really was very numb, which is another aspect, which has to do with this opening and this. Yeah. But I felt like my electrical, like energy centers, like connecting. I would feel the sensation come through my heart and my solar plexus and my sacral chakra. Like those chakras were like connected in this like power channel, and my throat too, I guess. And I just like felt into this. And like I said before, just the recognition of the message that I was being given is that this is like God like flowing through me. And it felt like when I went into active labor, it felt like a star was like coming from the sky and like coming through my body with each wave. And that was an intense feeling because it's like a surge of electrical power, but it was an amazing feeling at the same time. And I remember I like took a couple selfies of me like in the zone, and then that might have been at like 5 p.m. And then I was like, I'm gonna get in the tub. And we had a big clawfoot tub and I filled it up. I was totally by myself this whole time. I didn't want anyone else around. So I had a beautiful playlist of music, and then I got in the tub, and that just really, it helped for me. The water helps to mute some of that electric energy a little bit of the surges, and it just takes the intensity down a bit. And I think for women like me who can be like very like charged up easily nervous system wise, water really helps. That element helps to dampen it. And I was writing the sensations. I remember like I had this towel. I remember just thinking, I'm doing everything that I feel I want to do right now, and it's all perfect. And I had like a towel, and every sensation, I remember just like cuddling this like towel in my crook of my shoulder and kind of leaning against it, like it was almost like this mother. But I was like my own mother at that time. Like I was giving myself like this love. And I remember as a kid, my favorite thing was like hugging my mom and feeling her sweatshirt against my face, all of that. So I think there was something with that, but I remember, being very conscious of like, this is, I'm mothering myself right now, and isn't this good? And then the sensations were getting more intense. So I started to vocalize kind of like low tones, because when the current of like energy comes through, it almost like it can be so intense, it can make you like vibrate, and you have to like help it through your body and to dissipate, I feel. And so I would help like to moan it out and to vocalize it out. And I was just sitting like kind of reclined in the tub with every wave. And then I remember thinking the one point where I got scared was, I must have been in transition, like they all say. I remember thinking to myself, now you've really done it. Like no one's coming to save you. you have to do this yourself. Like, can I do this? Like,
Oh.
I don't know if I made a huge mistake. And that's such a poignant message, I think, for me to receive, because it kind of was like my fear telling me, like, are you happy that you like did this to yourself? And it's like, now it could be really terrible, or like, I don't know if you can make it through this. And right after that, I felt my daughter's head like in the passage almost to the opening. And I knew that that had been transition. And, but I couldn't believe it, because I got in the tub at 5. It was not that much later, that must have been an hour and a half later, that I felt her head coming out. And I think this happens in a lot of free births, where the ease, when we open and surrender, the ease with which the birth happens, like the speed and the ease can be like shocking. And we think it has to be like more work, or more like it's incredibly intense and scary at that transition point. But we think it has to be, we think we have to pay more, but really they can come and we deserve it to be this like flow. And I was a little in denial for a moment, and then I was like, Parker, I think the baby's coming. And then he came up and got in, and I asked him to help me see what was going on, because I couldn't believe it. And he said, yes, like there's a head or something coming out, you know, with each wave. And then the fetal ejection reflex, the automatic pushing, was like very easeful. And the kids are trying to break in. But it was amazing to feel that feeling of not trying at all and just letting it happen. And it is true. That's how it works. And then I was a little scared for her to emerge, because with my last experience, and it's an intense feeling, but I remember just feeling the intensity of the crowning and thinking like, this is all I need to get through. This is good. Like, I can handle this. And then her head came out, and it was the sweetest moment. And then I remember being like, she's okay, it's okay, it's chill, because we're in the water, but she's fine until she comes out, because she has the cord. And then the next sensation, I gave a little extra push because I wanted her to come out, and she came right out. And my husband caught her and put her on me. And I mean, there's nothing to describe how incredible, how the level of power you feel when you've like free birthed your own baby. It's the most holy, I would say it's like the most holy, pure moment. It's the most sacred moment, and the moment where they're coming into their bodies and starting to breathe and just peacefully laying on your chest. And it's amazing. And then at that moment, everything that had ever happened to me or like any women in my lineage was just like healed. And it was incredibly simple and very peaceful. And there were moments of intense feeling, but it was, anyone can do it, and it's how we're meant to. I knew at that moment too that that's how it is meant to be.
Oh, Carly, I feel like I'm tearing up. It's just like hearing that you, especially how you wrapped it up at the end with saying like that just healed like anything that had ever happened to me or my lineage. It's like that's what it can be, you know? Like, and that's it's like we have this idea that healing work is all in the mind or whatever, and it's like no, like this happens in the holiest of places, like women's wombs. Like it can happen in our
Mm-hmm.
body, which is holy.
Yeah.
And God, I just what a beautiful story. And you're right. It's like that's how it's supposed to be. Like it's supposed to be this moment of like you realizing and coming into your power. And
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah. And I think like, I think even, and then after pregnancy and after after a free birth or whatever, your like level of sensation in your womb is like increased, and your sexuality and sensuality like blossoms and flowers. And just, I think every time that you open and expand in your like female experience and in like the blood mystery experience, you just like continue to manifest like more pleasure in what it is to be a woman. So
Yeah.
like no matter when you're a maiden, a mother, or in menopause, or like a crone, you always have this opportunity to regenerate and create pleasure and create life no matter
Yeah.
what phase you're in. Yeah, as a woman.
True. Oh gosh. Well, we've got to wrap up, but I
Yeah.
do want to ask, the last question I always ask every woman, which is just if you want to share a little bit about where you are now. I know you've already shared that you're pregnant and kind of how that's been for you, but also just what piece of womb wisdom you might want to leave with the women listening.
So where I am now is this kind of funny place where I realize that birth and womanhood is actually just like, I'm so immersed in the normalcy of like its wildness that,
Yeah.
well, now in my phase of life, I have kids screaming at me all the time. But I'm so, now that I'm pregnant again, I'm just sort of like, well, this is how it is. I'm coming to terms that I don't have like, that I can sit with that and really live that through the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And I would say my womb wisdom that I would say is that your womb is like an eternal spring of endless regeneration and endless sensation and endless power. There's infinite potential in you as a woman. And the more you open and attend to the wildness of your womb and the blood mysteries and what it means to be a woman, and feel the sensations and feel your sensuality, the more you will see the fruits of your eternal spring coming to life in every way. Yeah.
I love that visual of the womb being an eternal spring, and I just feel that so deeply. Oh, Carly, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful stories. They all just have this theme around deep trust in your body and being in your experience and allowing your experience to be for you and to be pleasurable and for you to be worthy of that. I think that's so important for women to hear. And I'm so grateful that you came here to share your story. I also often ask women if they want to share where the women listening can find them. If you don't want to share, that's totally fine, but I thought I'd give you an opportunity.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. You can find me on Instagram at Mama Organic and Natural. And I actually have a course. It's a video and a PDF of, it's called The Energetics of Free Birth and Full Womanhood. And it's really a lot about what I talked about today, but it has to do with the fact that the simplest shift in energetics is the key to just unlocking this amazing potential that we all have.
Amazing. Sounds wonderful. And Carly writes really, really beautifully on Instagram too. So,
Oh, thank you.
thank you for tuning into the wisdom of the womb today. It's truly such an honor to bring these stories forward to you, and it would mean so much to me if you'd rate and review this podcast so that it could reach more women. If you're looking for deeper support, you can find the link to join our online community, the Cyclical Living Circle, in the show notes below. There, you'll also find the links to book one-on-one virtual sessions, shop the herbal shop, and any group programs that I'm currently offering. Plus, you can follow me on Instagram, and I love to connect with you all there. All right, see you next week.